everybody's comfortable. Yeah? So the speaker of tonight is Steve Martin. He's an astronomer, educator and writer. He received his master's degree in physics and astronomy from the University of Wyoming. He studied dark matter and spiral galaxies. But maybe this all sounds too difficult to comprehend, but Steve is an excellent storyteller and makes it easier to understand the complexity of the universe. So let's hear a big applause for Steve Martin.
Yeah. How's that? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming out. It's a beautiful night. Nice to see the skies are cooperating with us as well. And interesting, Imka mentioned my expertise is in dark matter, because we're talking about dark matter tonight, which is the preservation of the night sky and the impact of light pollution, not just the environment, but ourselves and our capacity to appreciate the universe above us. Also interesting that we had to sort of postpone the slideshow a little bit because we were having some light pollution issues. Now in this case, this was caused by natural sources, but it's a reminder that we're dependent on external circumstances sometimes for what we do. So, how many people here have seen the Milky Way? This is very good. I'd like to see this. Right? Because when I ask this question in my classes, maybe 1 or 2 students at the most have ever seen the Milky Way. It's incredible. I mean, because this is our galaxy. And I would say that Saba is one of the premier spots in the world to actually look at this, natural wonder. It's arcing right above us. We can see it later on tonight. And this is our galaxy. This is the galaxy that we're a part of. It's shaped like a disk. We live within the disk, and so we see it as a bright band stretching across the sky. In fact, all the stars you see tonight or any night are part of the Milky Way. And feel free to stop me, ask questions as we go along. But one thing I'd like to argue is that the night sky, let's see if this is working here. Okay, yeah. The night sky is part of our natural environment and should be protected just like we protect any other part of the environment. In fact, we spend half of our lives underneath the night sky. That's worth thinking about. Half of our lives are spent underneath the night sky. No matter where you live on Earth, you're going to spend half the time underneath the night sky. It's part of our original environment. It's part of the environment in which humans and the entire natural world around us evolved. And so in some sense, it's our home environment. Our bodies, the animals, the plants, the entire Earth around us has been shaped by this natural environment for billions of years. And so the natural world, including ourselves, needs the night and darkness as much as we need the day and sunshine. I put the slide in because it reminded me of Saba. Right? I don't think it's from Saba, but this is the kind of sky that you can see when you're in a dark spot away from city lights. And I remember the first time I went to Australia, I saw the Magellanic Clouds, right, the Clouds of Magellan, which are actually satellite galaxies which go around ours. And I couldn't believe it. I thought it was like a rain cloud. And then I realized it's a cloud of stars. I'm seeing a cloud of stars in the sky. Just so unbelievable. I was also disoriented because the constellations are different there. And Orion was upside down. You don't expect Orion to be upside down. And the moon was upside down. It's very interesting. When you go below the equator, the moon is flipped over. And so there's all kinds of different legends around the world about how they interpret the sky based on what they see. I'd also mention that the night sky is filled with all kinds of wonders. Now, we may not see the aurora very much in Saba, but it actually is possible to see the aurora from this latitude. We're in a year where the sun is at its maximum. There's a chance we could see the aurora here, so I'd say, keep your eye out. It's rare, but it is possible.
What time of year would that be?
It doesn't so much depend on the time of year, but it depends on how active the sun is. And this year is a peak for the sun's activity cycle. So there's flares and storms and aurora shows all over the world right now. This particular slide was taken in Iceland, where they see it pretty much every night. And if you haven't seen the aurora, I really recommend it as something to take a trip to see. There's also something else in this slide that many of you may not have seen before. That's snow. Right? They actually have that other places. So if you moved here and forgot about it, other people still get it. We still get it in Massachusetts, so it's just a little reminder that winter does come out other places. But so do natural wonders like the aurora. And it's a spectacular show. There's all kinds of wonders you can see in the night sky. But not just the sky, but the ocean has wonders as well. But it has to be a dark sky in order to see these. Isn't that great? These are star trails. So if you leave your camera for a long exposure, the Earth's rotation will cause the stars to trail, and you get beautiful images like this. One thing you can see is that the stars actually have colors. We don't see color so much at night because we use, rods in our eyes which aren't sensitive to color vision. But the stars do have color. And additionally, this is my home environment as an astronomer and as a scientist. Right? So it's the source of my research. It's the environment that I study most deeply. Dark matter is a very subtle phenomenon, and you need very dark skies and very large telescopes and sophisticated equipment to actually detect it. And you can't detect it directly, it's detected indirectly. And I can say more about that later on if people have questions about that. But I'd also argue that the night sky holds answers to some of the most fundamental questions about the universe and who we are. Not only dark matter, dark energy, how did the universe begin, where is it going, what's our place in it? These are all answers that are held in the night sky. And who knows? Who knows what we'll discover? We're also losing this natural resource. Light pollution is affecting all aspects of our society, but astronomers mostly, or astronomers to a great extent. This is the night sky outside of Mount Wilson in Arizona. This is outside Tucson, Arizona, which is one of the meccas for astronomy. And Tucson has some of the strictest light pollution codes in the country. And even with that protection, it's still impinging on astronomers' ability to see the night sky. This is a very interesting slide because it gives us a sense of what our Western civilization is like in many places of the world. We have this incredible natural resource which is available to us every night. And often we spend our evenings underneath these domes of lights doing something else rather than being outside appreciating it. So I think it's really pointing to a sense of isolation that many of us are starting to feel with the natural world, particularly people in cities. Here's another one from Austria. We've got the entire natural world out there beyond, and we're staying in the cities, lighting it up at night. Light pollution is a growing problem. Here's LA in 1908. Here it is 80 years later. So, and this is typical of many cities around the world as they become increasingly urbanized. And it's a serious issue across many parts of the country. So here's a map of light pollution, or ambient light, taken at different times. And you can see the growth from the 50s through the 70s into the 90s, and what it could be like in 2025 if we don't make some changes. By the way, I use maps like this to decide where to go on vacation. Wherever it's dark, that's where I'm going. But it's getting harder and harder to find, vacation spots. So that's my criteria. And this is the difference. This is what you see when you look at the constellation Orion under its natural night sky. This is what you see from the city. Well, it doesn't even compare in terms of quality of what's available. You know, as a boy growing up in the suburbs around Miami in South Florida, this is what I thought Orion looked like, because that's what I saw. So I now realize that it wasn't the camera that I was using, it was the night sky around me that was giving me images like this of Orion. And here's a famous picture of the Earth at night, which has a certain beauty to it. But you might be able to spot where you live based on the light pollution coming from that place. So, particularly the eastern part of the US, Europe is very well defined. Look at India, which is just industrializing, China as well. Japan is quite wired. Even Siberia, the Trans-Siberian Highway, is lit up across Asia. Now, there's still some places which are quite dark. You see the Amazon, Central Africa, right, Central Mongolia, Tibet, Australia, Canada. But it's becoming an issue. Can you spot Saba? Not so much, fortunately. Here's another map which includes parts of the Caribbean. There we go, there's Saba. Barely showing up, but it's still there. But even in places in the Caribbean, light pollution is becoming a serious issue. So we define light pollution as any artificial light created by humans. So we don't count the moon, the sun, the stars, because they've always been around. But we're just talking about excess light produced by humans. And it has a number of dramatic effects. Of course, it interferes with astronomical research. It disrupts ecosystems, which I'll mention in more detail later on. It's a tremendous waste of energy. Because if you go back a few slides, all that light that you're seeing is going directly up into space. It's basically being wasted. So if you're seeing it from space, it's wasted light because it doesn't do anyone any good. It's pointing in the wrong direction. I'll also talk about what's being done about this and what we can do individually. We also know that light pollution can have some very severe health effects. There are actually many studies that indicate that there are negative consequences to being exposed to light pollution, not just for animals, but for humans. And I would argue that light pollution is a form of pollution as serious as air, water, and land pollution. It's one that really hasn't been adequately addressed. We don't have the legislation in place to protect the environment the same way we do for these other forms, but it's potentially as serious, if not more serious. So we protect the air, the water, and the land. Why not the night sky? It's also part of the environment. And these are all images from Saba, you recognize. And I'll talk about the impact that light pollution has on the natural world first. Remember, the natural world around us has evolved over hundreds of millions, perhaps even billions of years, of a very defined day-night cycle. Right? Darkness has been a part of the evolutionary process for eons. And I'll mention some of the negative effects. Birds are among the species most impacted. Hundreds of millions of birds die every year from impacts with buildings and other light pollution related. And other marine species, insects, and mammals. And in every study that's been done, there have been negative effects found on the environment from light pollution. As many of you know, many species of wildlife are nocturnal. In other words, they are active at night. And I'm not an expert on many of these species, but many of you would know what they are. And this includes both reptiles, amphibians, birds, fish, and marine wildlife. And many species are partners with humans. In other words, there's an economic benefit, right, such as bats or other pollinators. So it's having negative impacts not only on the environment, but also on our economy, on our human activities as well. There's also diurnal patterns for wildlife, right? Many other animals need a day-night cycle like we do. They need a well-defined time after sunset when it's night out. They need a well-defined time when it's day out. And so having these natural cycles is part of their circadian rhythms. It affects mating, it affects behavior patterns. There's all kinds of cycles in nature regulated by this day-night cycle. Okay. And we're just starting to see the first studies about the consequences of light pollution. It's been an area of research which has been historically underfunded and underappreciated, but we're getting to see big results. It affects everything from zooplankton feeding on algae to the behavior and habitats of nocturnal animals. It affects insects, of course. You probably recognize that bright lights attract insects, and migrating birds especially. Okay. So let me just say a few things about bird navigation. As many of you may know, migrating birds use the sun, the moon, and the stars for navigation. It's very interesting that birds use the sun because they keep the orientation to the sun constant, and that gives them a good north-south direction. Now, one thing you have to recognize, or you recognize early on, is that the sun moves. So they need to know where the sun is and what time it is as well. So birds have a very well-defined circadian clock, an internal timekeeper, which tells them what time it is and where they should look for the sun. When that clock is reset, that actually affects their ability to navigate. And biologists have done this artificially in the lab. They've reset, the day-night cycle for birds and studied this. But if there's too much light pollution, that can reset the birds' internal clocks as well, which can confuse their navigational abilities, causing them to go off course with potentially disastrous consequences. They don't find the food sources, they don't find the mating grounds. It's a big effect. What's even more interesting is that it's been hypothesized and verified in experiments that the birds actually use these stars to navigate. They memorize positions of circumpolar constellations which are always visible from a certain latitude, and they maintain their orientation to those constellations when they're flying at night. Now, of course, if there are other lights available, that will distract them, that will bring them off course, and it will confuse their navigational systems. And I was shocked when I read this. This is a recent USDA study that shows something like 550 million birds every year die from collisions with lit buildings, more than any other source of bird mortality. I mean, I couldn't believe the number, so I had to double check it, and it seems to be accurate. And this is just in the US, so worldwide the number is probably much higher. Right, so lighting buildings at night is a severe distraction for birds, and a huge cause of millions of birds' deaths. The other relationship that's altered is the behavior of birds in the wild. One thing that they've found is that crow and pigeons tend to have populations much higher in lit areas because predators don't approach those lit areas. And I'll say why that is in a little bit, but birds such as owls and other predators stay away from those areas. So areas that have light pollution tend to be overpopulated with certain species, which throws off the whole ecological balance. Also, altering the day-night cycle for songbirds can affect the time that they sing their songs, which affects mating, which affects populations, and has negative consequences for future generations. If you take a look at nocturnal birds, one thing you notice is, one, how large their eyes are. They are adapted to a low-light environment. Their retinas are composed mostly of rods instead of cones. We have both kinds in our eye. We use cones for color vision during the day, and we use rods for night vision because it's more sensitive to low light levels. And so they're very sensitive to extraneous light. If there's any extra light in the environment, that will have a negative impact on them. And this has been a problem for some time. I found this image of a lighthouse in a 1912 monograph showing how birds were attracted to them even back then. So for over 100 years we've been seeing this tragic collision of birds with lit objects. One of the worst offenders for birds are the searchlights which go up into the sky, because birds will follow the lights straight down to the ground in an attempt to orientate. And a famous example is when 50,000 birds were killed in one incident. Another one was 10,000 birds colliding with the smokestacks of this power station in Ontario. One thing they realized after this is that steady red lights on towers were more attractive than white lights or flashing lights. So they modified their lighting codes after that. But it was a hard way to learn the lesson. It's not just birds, but insects. So millions of insects, of course, are attracted to light artificially every year and can have tremendous impacts. Now, my training isn't in biology, but I was amazed to discover that 2/3 of the animal protein consumed on the planet comes from insects. Right? So in other words, they form, a big part of the pyramid, and we're, at the apex of the pyramid, or near the apex. That can have pretty negative consequences. Right? If the bottom of the pyramid is disturbed, there's all kinds of repercussions up the whole chain. And, tragic for me personally, and for many other people, is I grew up around fireflies. I remember, seeing fireflies in every summer night, and I've noticed since then that fireflies are disappearing. It's not completely understood what's causing the fireflies to go away, but it's thought that artificial light is a contributor. We know that firefly numbers seem to be diminished in areas that have a lot of artificial light. But the mystery of why fireflies are disappearing is still an open question. Now I found this fascinating, that insects, such as the lovely dung beetle, may actually use the Milky Way for navigation. That's incredible, that these insects, these dung beetles, roll their dung in straight lines when the Milky Way is present. And they found that they make all kinds of random lines when the Milky Way is not present. They were able to test this in the lab and verify it's true. So in some way, some yet unknown way, these dung beetles are responding to the presence of the Milky Way. We don't know exactly how it happens, what receptors they use, or how they navigate, but they're in some way sensitive to the presence of the Milky Way. Fascinating.
Well, the balls better if they're rolled straight as opposed to...
Well, I don't know. I don't know if that affects them or not, but it's just they behave differently. So it's very interesting. Anybody know anything more about this? I'd like to hear more about it. I just found it fascinating that they actually do it. They're paying attention somehow to the night sky. Now, sea turtles are one of the most famous examples of a species affected by light pollution. As many of you know, they navigate thousands of miles across open ocean, returning to the same beach to nest again and again with incredible accuracy, and they spend most of their life cycle in the water. They only come to land in relatively few circumstances, such as the nest. And if there are artificial lights, the adult females won't come to land. The other interesting thing is that, and so we're talking about whale ships and whales. both out there plotting the seas, navigating by the stars. I thought that was just a very interesting metaphor and image to sort of hold as we're contemplating this. So it's not just humans that navigate with the stars, but other species do too. And it turns out that light pollution may disrupt coral reproduction. Right? Coral, as many of you know, is extremely sensitive to changes in the environment. So changes in salinity caused by climate change is having a huge impact. Any environmental pollutants affect coral dramatically, including light pollution. I thought it was absolutely incredible that coral reproduction is timed to moonlight. What an amazing system, right? To actually time, how you live your life according to the phase of the moon. And light pollution may have very deleterious effects on mating activity with nocturnal species. They've noticed this particularly with frogs, where their behavior changes when they're under light polluted conditions. This affects how they, with mate selection, with populations. It's a big impactor. It turns out that even plants are affected by light pollution. Right? Plants, as you might expect, are extremely sensitive to light because they rely upon it. And plants have up to 9 different photoreceptors. They're sensitive to polarized light. They know where the sun is in the sky. They know how long it's in the sky. They know the kind of light that they're receiving. And they respond. And so this affects growth patterns, it affects dormancy, it affects pollination. All kinds of plant cycles are affected by light pollution. A few examples are soybean plants. Even 100 feet from prison lighting were affected negatively. And an even bigger effect is found in deciduous plants and trees, which are very sensitive to seasonal changes in day-night. They need to shed their leaves in the fall, and they need to go through a dormancy period in order to have new blooms in the spring. If that's denied them, it has a huge stressing effect on the trees. Here's an example from upstate New York. Right, so notice in this tree has kept its leaves on because it was exposed to artificial light. In other words, it's not dropping its leaves as it should in order to go into full dormancy. And this is a stressor for the tree. It's staying, the leaves are staying on too long, and that's going to have a negative effect on the tree's life. I'll also talk about different fixtures. This is a terrible fixture, right? Because you can see how much light is being wasted going up into space. And I'll talk about good fixtures and poor fixtures. But you can see right here there's an effect on trees. Any questions, by the way? And light pollution is particularly insidious in that it goes a long way. Right? Light pollution in some places can travel over 200 miles. So it's potentially even more dangerous than more localized forms of pollution, such as chemical pollutants, which tend to stay more regionally located. But light pollution can have huge effects. If you've ever traveled across the American West, one thing you'll see at night are huge light domes on the horizon from the different cities. Those light domes can extend dozens, even hundreds of miles, depending on the atmospheric conditions. And so these light pollution effects can actually travel very far. Arches National Park used to be one of the darkest spots in the world, and it's losing a lot of its night sky due to Grand Junction and Moab growing. You can still see the Milky Way, but it's being affected with this light dome from Moab. So what's being done? Well, let me give you a few success stories where people have made changes that have affected these species in a positive way. Sea turtles, of course, were kind of the keystone species in this way. It's led to a whole revision of Florida's outdoor lighting code. Beaches are now protected. They turn off lights at beaches. They're really taking big strides to actually protect these beaches for sea turtles. Maybe not as much as they could, but it's still in the early stages. Along the U.S.-Mexico border, Border Patrol wants to put up bright lights along the whole border. They want to basically light up the whole border. And of course, there are many endangered cat species and other nocturnal species that live there. And they're getting some feedback about this, that maybe that isn't a great idea. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is pressing for an environmental impact statement. That may have some effect, but once again, it's a statement. It's not necessarily legislation. But awareness is growing. In Canada, there's a very successful program called FLAP, where people are becoming aware of the danger of having lit buildings. And so building owners are voluntarily shutting down the lights in their buildings during the darkest hours of the night to preserve them for migrating birds. Based on this, many U.S. cities are sponsoring successful lights out programs, particularly Chicago is leading the way with this, asking building owners to voluntarily turn off their lights during times of bird migration. And this is having a very positive impact. In terms of marine life, Scottish fishermen recently won a civil court case where they argued that adjacent lights were affecting the sea trout population. The court ruled in their favor, and they were able to eliminate the local source of light pollution, and the sea trout species are coming back. The same thing happened in the state of Washington, where unshielded lights in the City River were affecting salmon fry. All they had to do was actually to put shields in the lighting. It didn't affect them economically, and the salmon are coming back. So we can do little things that can have a big effect on these species. National Park Service is aware of this and actually has more and more dark sky programs led by rangers. They are retrofitting their existing lights with full cutoff optics. And I'll show this in more detail, but notice in this fixture, you don't see the light bulb at all. The light bulb is recessed back in here, so all the light goes directly down to the ground where you want it. It doesn't spread out, it doesn't go up into the atmosphere. There are certain fixtures which are much better for this, and I'll mention more of them. And there's been a huge change in policy around migrating birds. We now know, where the migrating bird routes are. We know the cities that they go through, and those cities are taking action. And of course, new towers that are being built with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service guidance. Once again, back to this sad map of the United States. And if you live in any of these areas, and this is a big part of the U.S. population, you could look at a similar one for Europe, a lot of this population never sees the night sky. In other words, their eyes never become fully dark adapted. They don't get that day-night cycle. And there are potentially very dangerous health effects from this. Not just disturbance in sleeping, but in melatonin cycles as well. So a few impacts for light pollution on human health. Of course, it interferes with circadian rhythms. Right? The circadian rhythm is an internal biological clock that affects many metabolic processes. Melatonin is one of the regulating hormones, and too much exposure to light affects that system very strongly. Right? It suppresses melatonin, which can cause sleep disturbances. There also seems to be a correlation with childhood leukemia. I don't think the connection is very well understood, but they've noticed a rise in the incidence of leukemia cases where there is too much exposure to artificial light. There's also air and water pollution-related health problems. It turns out that if you have a dark night, light pollution has time, atmospheric pollutants have time to sort of precipitate and clear the air. If you have artificial light, that can actually activate photoresponsive molecules and stir up the light pollution, prevent it from settling. So the air quality in a dark site is actually much better at dawn than it is in a light pollution site because it's not being photoactivated. The chemistry isn't happening as a result of the light coming in. Water, same thing. Water will precipitate and clear itself over a dark night cycle if it's not being photoactivated by artificial light sources. glare into roadways creates dangerous conditions. How many people have been driving and have someone coming at you with your brights on? That's glare. That's light pollution where it goes directly in your eye and doesn't allow you to see anything. All right, so I'll say more about that. And I'd also argue that this is part of our natural environment and we should preserve it. Not just for our own appreciation and wonder, but it's also our legacy for future generations. I mean, I think every school kid should grow up knowing about the Milky Way and seeing that phenomenon. Let me just say a little bit more about the circadian rhythm disruption, because it is very serious. It turns out that our bodies actually need total exposure to darkness. So this is important for you to take home. So if you sleep with a nightlight, try to turn it off, because it's very important for your eyes to get absolute darkness as much as possible. If you sleep with the TV on, turn it off. I mean, it's not good. Your eyes actually need that darkness because it has big effects on the hormonal and metabolic systems. There's been links to disruptions in circadian rhythm with obesity, diabetes, bipolar sleep disorders, depression, sleep disorders. And Dr. Mario Moda in Massachusetts has actually found a correlation between circadian rhythm disruption and certain types of cancer, especially breast cancer. In fact, circadian rhythm disruption was recently classified as a class 2A carcinogen on the same level as tobacco smoke for lung cancer. So you may not smoke and think that you're safe from cancer, but if you're exposing your eyes to too much light, that can have as much effects as smoking. So it's pretty serious. And we're still just understanding the impacts on human health. Of course, there's psychological stress from being exposed to too much light. In fact, I tell my students, if you can cut down on the screen time as much as possible at night, that's much better for you. It helps your body naturally wind down, get ready for bed, go into a dormant cycle, which it needs. They found a correlation between children who sleep with the light on are more likely to need glasses. So because it stresses the eyes, right, having that light activates the eyes and causes unnecessary muscle tension. And of course, if you're not getting the sleep that you need, it can suppress the immune system and be linked to many other disorders. So keep it dark at night as much as possible. Additionally, there are tremendous economic effects. I was shocked to discover that maybe half the light used in the US for lighting is wasted because it's pointing directly upwards. That's a huge number. And current estimates put the wasted energy between $2 and $5 billion. Remember, most of the light that you're seeing in this light pollution map is being wasted because it's being pointed up at the camera, which is in space. It's not doing anyone any good, and it's creating some tremendously hazardous effects. Lighting is responsible for almost 1/4 of all electricity consumption worldwide. That's incredible. 25% of our energy is used for lighting. And 30% of the lighting at night is completely wasted, which could be a waste of almost $4.5 billion in the US. There's also a huge greenhouse emissions effect here because we have to use greenhouse gases to produce the energy for that. So this is 6 million tons of coal, the equivalent of 23 million barrels of oil per year that's being wasted through wasted light, wasted energy. So it takes about a half a ton of coal to produce 100 watts of incandescent light for dusk to dawn. So if you live someplace where you leave the lights on all the time, you might want to consider getting a timer because it's not necessary. And it's a huge waste of energy, and it's causing greenhouse gases to generate that energy. So you can actually help save the planet just by turning off the light at night. And light pollution, of course, is air pollution because we cause air pollution to generate all this energy. We burn coal, we burn fossil fuels, we're adding that to the atmosphere, which we certainly don't need. So wasted light is also carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So we can actually have an impact on greenhouse gas emissions by controlling our light. So what can be done? I'll go through some of these steps. Probably the most important thing people can do is if you have a light fixture, make sure it's shielded. The big advantage to this is if you shield the light source, you can actually use a lower wattage bulb because you're not wasting the energy. And the shield that you use will reflect the light back down to the ground where it's used. So if you have a 60-watt fixture, you can probably get away with a 40-watt bulb and save that much energy as a result. If you can change to CFLs or LEDs, of course they're much more energy efficient. That's a great solution as well. Try to direct the light as much as possible, and I'll give some examples about this. In other words, put the light only where you need it. Don't spray it around into your neighbor's yard. You'll have better relationships with your neighbors, and you'll save energy. If you can put your lights on a sensor, this is probably one of the most effective ways to have good security, is have a sensor-based light system, because that tells the intruder they're being watched. It's also saving energy because that light isn't being activated. And additionally, we need to really bring this to local and state governments. We need to revise the lighting codes and spread the word. So all these save energy and money and protect the environment. There's literally no downside. It's a win-win situation. So here's some examples. Here's an example of good lighting. So notice that the light is being directed downward. The night sky is preserved above. You can't see the light bulb. There's no bare bulb here. It's recessed here in the fixture, and it's being pointed down where you need it. All right, so it produces even illumination for all areas in the circle here. It's very effective. Poor lighting has the bulb exposed. It shines some of the light up into the atmosphere where it's completely wasted. And because you can see the bulb, it's a strain on our eyes. So it's called light trespassing glare. This is the worst possible situation, and maybe you've seen fixtures like this, these globe fixtures, which send the light everywhere but where it's needed. You might be, under one of these street lamps, and you can't even read the paper because the light is going everywhere else except where it's needed. Here's an example. This is in Salem, Massachusetts. Terrible. You can't even read underneath the light. So what's the point of the light? It may look pretty, but there are more aesthetic fixtures that do a better job. Here's another one. How would you like to walk into this business with this light shining in your eyes? And notice how dark it is below the lights. They're not doing a whole lot of good. They're going away from the building. They're not lighting up the area very well. And it's creating glare. It's, opening your eyes. It's causing eye strain. It's terrible. Here's what it could look like. Notice how subtle the light is. Note how it's being pointed down where it's needed. It actually looks attractive. It's aesthetically pleasing, and it's effective. It turns out that our lighting codes were actually written at a time when we used gas lamps. And in many cases, that was the last time they were revised. So some of our lighting codes are 50, 100, or even more years old. So you notice these fixtures, they look very antique because they are antiques. Right? They were designed for gas lamps, right? Back when we used gas to light our streets. Well, if you properly shield your fixture, you can use much less wattage than you think. 40 watts of incandescent or even 9 watts of a CFL will be plenty to illuminate a doorway. You don't need a lot of light. So the important thing here is not to over-illuminate the areas where you need it. You're saving energy and reducing light pollution. Here's some good examples of fixtures. Notice how in each case, they have some kind of reflective pad on them that will direct the light back downwards. And so it doesn't have the bulb exposed, it directs the light downward where it's needed. Even this is an attractive fixture for being used in the city if you want an antique look. It directs the light back downwards. I've been looking around at the lights on Saba, and I see some street lights like this. So not bad. So it's good to see that some of them are out there. And it turns out that we can do this for even big sports facilities, right? How many people have seen stadiums like this where the lights are just shining, out randomly. I mean, some of it hits the field, but a lot of it gets wasted. They could be directed downwards, and there's many successful stories where this is actually being done. So commercial light pollution doesn't have to be, commercial lighting doesn't have to be wasteful in that sense. Glare is terribly dangerous. I mean, here's the same image. One with an unshielded fixture and the other with a properly shielded fixture. So notice the improvement in safety. Right, so it allows your eyes to dark adapt so you can be more sensitive to threats, when you're driving. And glare doesn't help security. So this is a terrible streetlight. Take a look at this image, and can you see where the person went? She's still in the image. I'll go back and forth. There she is. She's still there. She's actually right here, right underneath the lamp that's supposed to be illuminating the area where you're supposed to see her. So of course it doesn't lead to better security because the glare is preventing you from seeing, anyone who's threatening. So overlighting doesn't improve security. There's a myth out there that the more lights, the more secure you'll be. Turns out that studies have actually shown that's not true. That overlighting doesn't actually reduce crime. Directed lighting, sensor-based lighting, and well-placed lighting is an effective deterrent. Here's a simple fix you can put for your doorway. Here's one of these open light fixtures. Notice how the light is going everywhere except the stairs where you need it. And with just a simple pineapple can, you can create an effective light shield that directs the light downwards onto the stairs where you need it and doesn't overlight, doesn't create glare, doesn't annoy your neighbors. And you can put a smaller fixture in and save money. This is my new personal enemy, are these searchlights. And you see them around cities. I mean, McDonald's are using them for advertising. Well, you're basically beaming money into space. I mean, it's terrible. And think about how this is affecting the migrating birds. They can fly right down the beam and collide with the buildings. But you're basically spraying energy into the air. It's completely wasting it. 2 million barrels of oil per day is being wasted by over-illumination. We're using more light than we need.
What do you mean they're being offered leased searchlights? So some companies...
Companies are approaching these businesses saying, hey, you want to lease a searchlight from us? It'll, attract business. Now, they're probably paying the electric bill too, but it's not a good thing. Searchlights are the worst thing. So here's an example of what you can do to actually improve your own personal lighting and have better relationships with your neighbors. I mean, maybe you know a neighbor who's got the floodlight pointing directly at you. Well, I actually have some brochures that go through, and I'll hand them out, I'll make them available afterwards, how to talk to your neighbor in a civilized way to address this problem. That improves both your relationship with them and solves the problem too. So, the people in this house might feel more secure, but I wouldn't want them around. It's terrible, these floodlights. Lots of success stories. I mean, light pollution is becoming better known as an issue, especially in many municipalities. LA, which we saw the images of in the beginning as being so terrible, is really leading the country by retrofitting all their old fixtures with LEDs. Now, it's a boost for the city. Around the world, people are producing or creating international dark sky parks, where they're actually bringing tourists to their location because the skies are so dark. Of course, this attracts millions of amateur astronomers every year to gatherings. Where I live, there's the Arcadia, Maine Dark Sky Festival. They have an entire week-long festival to celebrate the night sky with all kinds of astronomical events. It's a huge tourist draw. I was thinking today, wouldn't this be a great thing for Saba, is to make Saba an international dark sky site? I mean, there'd be great press, great PR. It'd have the distinction of being an international dark sky park. I think it's a great thing to shoot for. And these places are beautiful. They're places you want to go in the daytime too. There's so much natural beauty. And it's demonstrating that the beauty's there, not just during the daytime, but also at night. there's a lot of information on this slide, but what I want to illustrate is that solving the solving the problem of light pollution is actually easier than other types of pollutants. So chemical and light pollution have similar negative effects on the ecosystem, but it's much easier to clean up the night sky than it is to clean up chemical pollutants. All you have to do is turn the lights off, and the ecosystem can restore itself. So it's a very cheap fix. Right? If you can replace your fixtures, if you can turn off lights where they're needed, it's an immediate, effective solution for healing the environment. And of course, all kinds of species will benefit as a result of doing this. But we need to recognize that light pollution is a pollutant. Like any other environmental pollutant, it needs to be regulated, it needs to be made aware of. And it needs to be considered as dangerous a pollutant as air, water, and land pollution. Because we're seeing it has so many negative effects that are persistent. And finally, I would point out that the night skies belong to all of us, right? It's our legacy for future generations. It's our legacy not just for ourselves, but for the natural world, the animals, the life that we share this world with. And so protecting it is protecting the world around us and creating a legacy for generations to come. So here's where you may live. Here's where you could live. Right? So what a difference it makes. All right, thank you very much. Yes, it will also be the International Night of the Moon. People all around the world are going to be looking at the moon tomorrow night, including ourselves. And it'll be a beautiful first quarter moon. We'll take a look through telescopes, and we'll be celebrating the moon with people around the world. So it's an international astronomical holiday, so it's great timing.